Kate Bolduan of CNN covered a story on the devastation ongoing in Syria, and it really struck a nerve here.
Today, the United Nations is asking for 48 hours of relief in the fighting to break from the violence between the government regime and rebel forces. In 5 years of war, more than 250,000 people have lost their lives. That includes 4,500 children in Aleppo alone. Millions more displaced without a home. Now that includes Omran. And what strikes me is we shed tears, but there are no tears here. He doesn't cry once. That little boy is in total shock. He's stunned inside his home one moment and the next, lost in the flurry and the fury of war and chaos. At least 3 people were killed by this bomb in this neighborhood. This is Omran. He's alive. We wanted you to know.
In Syria, what do we do about it? Because I've described to you, I think we've probably covered the Syria situation in more detail than almost anybody else in all the different versions and forms of media combined. So you guys know on one side you have the Assad government, so the Syrian government. You have various Shia militias. You have Hezbollah, for example. You have the people who are fighting to keep the Assad government in power. And then on the other side, you have rebel factions, at this point, the majority of which are Islamists and jihadists. So you have ISIS. We all know who they are. You have Al-Nusra Front, which at one point was officially Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now they've distanced themselves from Al-Qaeda, but it's not like they've dropped their belief in Sharia. And it's not like they aren't jihadists anymore. They are. You have the FSA, which are more moderate rebels, but according to recent reports, the FSA has diminished in power, and the FSA, you know, they're more of a minor player now than they used to be. At the beginning, you could have said, you know what, some of the Syrian rebels were more moderate, and there was a moment there, a brief flicker in time where maybe you could have had a transition government away from Assad, and it could have been, you know, a democratic, secular Syria or something in a different direction with the rebels. But now it appears like that position and that point in time has largely passed. And again, we have mostly Islamist and jihadist rebels. So given the fact that you have, you know, very unsavory characters who are leading the rebel movement right now, given the fact that you have the Assad government who, according to many reports, they're no angels either, and they are responsible for many civilian deaths as well. What do you do? So when you look at Omran and you say, okay, I want to help the kid. I want to help the kid. But how do you help the kid? What do you do to help the kid? It's not easy. There's no easy answer. There's no easy answer. So look, when you try to be as rigidly objective as possible as you can about this, I mean, I guess the first thing you'd think of is there's got to be some sort of diplomatic way to solve this. There's got to be some way to sit down and negotiate and compromise and come to a reasonable middle ground or just a reasonable deal overall, where you have Russia sit down with the United States, you have the Syrian government involved, you have, you know, the people who are funding the rebel movement, so Saudi Arabia, Turkey, you have all these people sit down, you know, or you have representatives from each government, you have representatives from the different fighting factions actually in Syria. They all sit down and they all have to iron out a plan that's somewhat agreeable and get a ceasefire going. That does appear, though, to be pretty impossible. They've tried to do some ceasefires. I don't know the other details of said deals in Syria, and it just, they fall apart. And they fall apart because the sides are so, you know, far apart from each other. And then, look, people who say, well, this proves the U.S. should get more involved. Guys, the U.S. there's already been stories, and we've covered them, of the CIA arming one group of people in Syria, and the Pentagon arming another group of people in Syria, and then those groups fighting each other. You think we just wave a magic American magic wand? A magic American magic wand. Nice double magic. And then all of a sudden, poof, everything's better. No, because we are involved, we've been involved, and it's not really getting better. If anything, it's getting worse. So what is the answer? I don't know what the answer is. I don't know, you know, what you do. And if you can't get a diplomatic solution, a negotiated deal with all sides where I don't know what the answer would be, a shared power government, or you split up Syria, or I don't know. Well, then what do? The only other thing you could think of is UN involvement on a larger scale where, wherever there's a clear genocide of civilians happening, they prevent it. So, for example, we cover the story. It was Amnesty International released a report. Many of the Syrian rebels are doing torture. They're doing executions. They've banned music in these areas, again, because these are Islamists and jihadists, mostly. So what do? Do you have the UN try to get involved there and fight them back and then set up a zone where the civilians can be not harmed and they're in communication with both sides and the airstrikes avoid the UN camp? I don't know. To me, when I hear that, it's a good idea, but it's easier on paper. It's easier said than done. And then also, the only other third option I could think of is, well, you just continue to aid the people who are on the right side no matter what. So in other words, you can't risk going, like the U.S. had tried, we're going to arm Sunni militias to go in there and fight ISIS and Assad. Well, that didn't work because eventually, when they went into Syria, they just handed over their weapons to al-Nusra, which again, at the time is al-Qaeda in Syria. And so you just armed jihadists when you were trying to not do that and you were trying to fight ISIS and fight the Assad government. So you can't roll the dice on these questionable groups. So then what do? Who do you arm? I mean, the only group of people who we know for sure, hey, they're on the right side no matter what here, are various Kurdish groups. So, if you want to give an extensive amount of aid to Kurdish groups, okay, I guess that's a step in the right direction because we know that they care deeply about not harming civilians and they're on the right side of everything here. Or, I don't know, the Shia militias that aren't committing atrocities, and there are many that are, but the Shia militias who are fighting the right groups and we know they're targeting ISIS and they actually give a shit about civilian casualties, do you give aid to them? Again, I don't know, but it seems like these are the only three options and none of them are easy. But when we see a picture like that, all of us go, we got to do something. But something is not by definition good. You could fuck it up, and we have fucked it up. We've armed jihadists and Islamists. We've further destabilized the region. We know what U.S. interventions recently have looked like. It's made problems worse. So what do? The only options I see are some sort of a negotiated deal through diplomacy with all the sides involved. That's hard to do. Perhaps UN involvement just to stop potential pockets of genocide from happening. That's also hard to do. And aid to the Kurds and maybe some Shia militias who we know aren't committing atrocities. That's all I got. After that, I'm out. I don't know what the answer is. And honestly, overall, it appears like what we're looking at in Syria, it's a civil war. That's what it is. So is it a sad fact of reality that civil wars have to play themselves out with all their destruction and death and devastation, and we all have to sit on the sidelines, handicapped to do anything, because that's just the nature of the beast that we're looking at right now? Maybe that is the case. And my heart bleeds for every single person in Syria who's affected in a negative way. But again, I don't have a good answer. Nobody has a good answer. Anybody who tells you, this is what we do and that's it, they're simpletons.